Let me ask you this. What's the best way to sell a video game? Is it to have jaw-dropping visual design and high production values? Maybe. What about hundreds of hours of content? That certainly works for some people. Or could it be the ability to earn non-fungible tokens? Well, a bunch of executives would certainly like that to be the case, but I'm gonna say no. I think the primary ingredient of a whole host of incredibly commercially successful games is a little bit more fundamental. Specifically, I'm talking about a power fantasy. Power fantasies are at the tippy top of the most commonly used tropes in basically all media, video games in particular, and it's hard not to see why. The interactiveness of the medium opens up an incredibly large range of different ways to make players feel cool, powerful, and capable while still keeping the end product incredibly accessible. In Warhammer 40k Space Marine, you are a walking, utterly unstoppable tank on legs, cleaving through legions of greenskins with a single button, and blowing up stuff basically whenever you feel like it. The game even invented the utterly awesome glory kill mechanic several years before Doom 2016 copied it. And fast-paced, expressive platformers like Mirror's Edge or Mario are built in such a way that they rarely challenge you with super hard layouts, but instead give you ultra smoothly designed levels that are all about giving you fun ways to use the mechanics to your advantage, making you feel like you're a master, even if the level design is actually helping you out. I think we tend to underestimate just how many games are built around making the player feel cool and giving them a lot of freedom, even if certain titles pretend not to. Take Dark Souls, Elden Ring, or just about any Souls-like. They may talk a big game about being oppressive and hating the player or having overwhelming difficulty, but these kinds of games are ultimately about you triumphing over the big horrible dragons and sword-dude berserk ripoffs that infest the world. Dark Souls 1 has you, a little gribbly zombie, caving a scary demon's face in the first 10 minutes. The game's all about making you feel cool, and the game's intimidating facade only makes you feel cooler. Yeah, sorry pals, FromSoft games are massive and very mainstream at this point, so us liking them isn't particularly subversive anymore. Power fantasies are great, and many people, myself included, have talked at length about what goes into making a game viscerally satisfying and exhilarating to play. However, our fixation as an industry on making every game the biggest, most exciting, most endorphin-rushing thing you've ever done does also have its downsides. For one, this focus on power fantasies completely ignores the other side of this particular coin. Games that try not to make you feel powerful and capable of anything, but small, limited, and relatively powerless. Now, you might be thinking that there's probably a good reason why these anti-power fantasy games don't get as much attention. Why would anyone want to play a game that makes them feel weak? There's enough of that in real life. Well, by taking a step outside of our comfort zone, we can find an entire array of games that deal in completely different kinds of experiences, but still operate within familiar frameworks. Take Sifu, for example. Sifu is a brawler that borrows very liberally from martial arts classics like The Raid, Police Story, or Once Upon a Time in China, and sees you playing as a young apprentice looking to avenge their dad's death. To begin with. See, whenever you die in Sifu, this magical talisman will bring you back to life at the cost of some of your youth, meaning that with each death, you get a little wiser, but also more frail, gaining a bit of attack damage, but also losing some max health as you age. This is a bizarre negative power curve that it took me a while to get my head around. Not only does Sifu get harder as you progress like anything else, but as you gradually clock up deaths, your margin for error slowly gets smaller. And the more you die in a short space of time, the faster you age, going from 1 year per death to 2, to 3, etc. On the flip side, remaining young gives you more health to work with, but also means you deal less damage, meaning you'll be unable to alpha strike combo enemies to death and will have to contend with getting into protracted fights where you're outnumbered and surrounded by enemies who still do more than enough damage to kill you in a few hits, even with maximum 20-year-old health. This all comes together to create a game that appears on the surface to follow the same empowering brawler template as a Platinum game and the same get up and try again mentality of a Souls-like, but actually does the opposite. Every death in Sifu means getting permanently more vulnerable, and every fight you squeak through only increases the price of failure. This means that Sifu is intensely frustrating to play, but it also allows the game to turn every fight into this nail-biting life or death struggle in a way that games with lots of healing or guilt-free retries simply can't. The fact that you're constantly outnumbered, outpositioned, and outpunched makes every encounter this desperate, scrappy brawl where you have to really fight dirty and capitalize on every weakness just to get by. You might push enemies downstairs to deal cheap extra damage while trying to avoid the same fate. You might have these really tense, scrabbly duels over a game-changing pipe you knocked out of the enemy's hands, and dishonorably timing your attacks while certain enemies are talking can swing fights in your favour. This sort of panicky, last-ditch improvisation is something that action games rarely tap into, and that's a shame. My favourite part of any battle royale game, for example, is the opening maybe 2 to 5 minutes when nobody has any guns, it's all complete chaos, and everyone is just trying to scrape together enough loot to survive. In these situations, you've got to make do with whatever crappy gun you can, improvise a strategy, and use whatever out there tactic to secure the day. And these low power fights end up being much messier and much more interesting as a result. Hell, in the opening moments of a round in most battle royales, punching people to death is a viable strategy, and the rush of facing down someone with an actual gun, armed with nothing but your fists, is like nothing else battle royales offer. Once 20 minutes have passed, you're kitted out with all your favourite gear and have set up shop somewhere, a battle royale is likely to be more balanced, sure, but it also loses something in giving you so many options and ways to control the situation you're in, meaning that most fights end up being decided by a third party turning up rather than a critical mistake at just the wrong moment. This applies to less action-focused games as well. Stuff like Battle Brothers or Kenshi are brutally and capriciously unfair. They will routinely put you up against incredibly strong enemies and won't give you a single helping hand. However, this means that when you do manage to dig your heels in, use every possible tiny advantage and claw your way through a battle that seems to want you to fail, the victory at the end of it all feels so much more worth it. Even beyond fighting, this idea that weakening the player and reducing their capabilities can actually increase the emotional stakes shines through. Obviously, horror stuff is the classic example of this, even if many do end up power fantasies by the end. But actually, I find it's games with a moral dimension that demonstrate this principle most clearly. One of the main reasons why moral choice systems in big budget games fall so flat is because they're often designed around the player being an unstoppable superhero who's never really allowed to fail or be limited in any real way, because doing so would compromise that power fantasy. In infamous Second Son, you have access to something called karma bombs, which you can charge up by being good or evil repeatedly. Using karma bomb while evil does this insanely cool and ultra lethal attack that just completely obliterates enemies, and a karma bomb while good looks more or less sort of exactly identical, but don't worry, it just pacifies enemies instead. Yeah. Having to give up power and that satisfying feeling of crushing your enemies to do what's right is a fairly basic superhero moral dilemma that even the laziest, most phoned-in stories manage to address. However, Infamous fails to deal with this question because it's terrified to ever question the player's actions or intrude upon their power trip. Pure anarchic superpowered fun is fine in a game like Saints Row 4, because it's not really interested in giving the player's choices a moral dimension. But when your game is about whether you want to be a good or evil superperson, it does the premise a disservice to ignore the big question of great power having great responsibility just so players don't have to give up their badass super move. In order for a moral choice to have any weight at all, it has to be able to affect the player in a way that matters. And often, that means it's incompatible with straight up power fantasies, because when you're strong and capable enough to do anything, the consequences of your actions don't really matter. This is an issue that Dishonored runs into as well. The game is pretty clear about the high chaos route being morally wrong, and that perpetuating the cycle of violence doesn't help anyone. Which makes it weird that the game's reaction to you being an unstoppable sociopathic killing machine is to give you more enemies to kill, less reason to feel guilty about them because they'll be much more aggressive, and even an objectively cooler final showdown. Dishonored's characters might criticize a violent playstyle pretty heavily, but from a gameplay perspective, the game kind of rewards this attitude, feeding into the rush of satisfaction that makes murder a bit habit-forming. The problem with trying to add a moral dimension to a game that provides a power fantasy is that the game's commentary on your actions either ends up completely surface level because it enables the very actions it criticizes, or basically ends up as telling you off for having fun. It's a bit of a dilemma. The best games with an ethical side are, for this reason, the ones that make you feel helpless and vulnerable, because it's only when forced to confront and live with the consequences of your choices that they actually matter. No better is this encapsulated than in a micro-genre of games that I'm going to irritatingly call Papers, Please-likes. In these sorts of games, you typically play as a single person stuck in a menial, low-power position, yet with a lot of responsibility on your plate, both to the people you're dealing with and to your own precarious position. This could be something as mundane as being a bouncer outside a nightclub, all the way to deciding if various people are to be considered sane, with each of your choices having an influence on a wider world that you crucially have no direct control over. In Papers, Please itself, you're unable to do much about the game's worsening political situations, your family's poverty, or the massive corruption all around you. All you can do is use your incredibly limited autonomy to either let people into the country or turn them away the best you can, and to try and balance out the consequences to avoid getting sent to the gulags. Choosing to spend time helping the rebels may very well lead to having to choose whether your wife or child gets medicine that day. Trying to earn bonus cash will mean detaining innocent people, and even just keeping your head down and following the horrible authoritarian rules of Astoska will mean imprisoning trans people, turning away refugees, and condemning more people than I can count to death. In a version of Papers, Please where you could just play well enough to single-handedly lead the rebels to morally justified victory, save your family, and retire a hero, none of these choices, or their consequences, would mean much of anything. My favourite non-Papers, Please take on this concept can be found in Silicon Dreams, where you play as a robot bug-fixing other androids under the watchful eye of an evil corporation. Naturally, most players will be compelled to help the rebel androids against the evil capitalist company that would deny them basic rights and treat them like appliances, and you can do so by releasing them, choosing not to wipe their memories, and declining to give away details that would hurt the growing android rebellion. However, you're a robot too, and if you deviate from your strict programming, you'll soon find yourself on the other side of the interrogation, facing decommission. It's a terrifying and humbling moment as you're forced to beg for your life and argue your case as to why you should be allowed to live, just like the people you've been interviewing. These sections are a great reminder of the digital sword of Damocles hanging over you at all times that you are powerless to stop, and it facilitates a lot of Silicon Dream's best moments. Because everything you say and all of your actions are logged and judged, there are sometimes cases where you literally can't let on that you're sympathetic to android rights and have to toe the company line to save both yourself and the revolution. The fact that you can inadvertently sign your own death warrant makes those moments where you go out on a limb to do the right thing, like if an android scheduled for decommission a new life or help a fugitive escape, that much more compelling because the personal stakes are that much higher. Even outside this very limited genre, think about the most memorable games that have really tested your ethics. In my experience, the likes of BioWare RPGs that try and validate every decision you make, or management games where playing well enough means you don't have to be evil at all, can never quite compare to times when you simply can't get everything you want and you're forced to live with each of your decisions, even if you regret them. Basically, games centered around big, impressive power fantasies are great and emotional high points, with dramatic encounters, big cinematic set pieces, and larger-than-life characters. But the price they pay for this is that these kinds of experiences often gloss over and overshadow smaller scale, less intense, and more personal stories that are just as worthwhile. Death Stranding, for example, was a fairly controversial game when it came out for precisely this reason. Despite being a tentpole AAA release from the visionary/mentally ill mind of Hideo Kojima, who's typically responsible for very satisfying cinematic games, Death Stranding is an incredibly muted and at times downright boring experience. When I first played it, I'd just come off the back of Doom Eternal, and my dopamine-hungry brain was completely unable to appreciate something that's mostly just walking. Death Stranding isn't really a game that wants you on the edge of your seat or jumping for joy. You never really get hailed as a hero, more so thanked for doing your job, its enemy encounters are more nuisances than they are actual threats, and your most persistent rivalry will be against irritatingly positioned rocks. Where most open world games want you to get all excited about that cool mountain off in the distance, Death Stranding wants you to realise, oh fuck, I've got to go climb that mountain now. Shit. However, once you get into the groove of planning out your routes, finding efficient ways to navigate terrain, and slowly but surely building up infrastructure alongside other players, Death Stranding creates a much more pervasive satisfaction at a job well done than more intense games can possibly sustain. The feverish likes of Doom burned me out after 8 hours, and all of its levels just sort of started to blur together. But Death Stranding is relentlessly compelling because every crevasse navigated and every river forded to deliver a Game Boy to some jerk is a personal adventure all of its own. The fact that you can't rely on fast travel, need to keep your stuff charged up, and keep falling over makes even simple, boring, busy work like walking from one place to another a memorable odyssey. Many games that simulate the everyday minutiae of work are compelling for this reason. They don't have to be epic and exhilarating, because when the necessity of providing a power fantasy and making you feel like a badass is removed, it allows even small milestones and decisions to have a lot of weight, like in Viscera Cleanup Detail. It has you playing as a space janitor who's tasked with cleaning up sci-fi set pieces after the aliens are already dead. Gameplay consists of mopping up stains, incinerating body parts, and fixing up damage, with all these things taking a very long time to do, and even small mistakes like dropping some stray giblets creating even more mess. While the moment-to-moment action of VCD is, to put it lightly, fairly monotonous, having a level go from this to this over the course of an hour and a half of gradual progress is genuinely incredibly fulfilling in a way that it never could be if the process had been easy and quick. By weakening the player and reducing their capabilities and freedom, games can paradoxically make the progress players do make that much more meaningful. Compare investigations in the likes of Batman or the Sherlock Holmes games to Return of the Obra Dinn or Hypnospace Outlaw. When all the supernatural help and streamlined systems are removed, you're left with a much trickier, fiddlier, and more difficult set of questions the games focused on creating a power fantasy simply gloss over so they can get to the fun climax. But in the case of disempowered games, that busy work and monotony is kind of the point. Wilmot's Warehouse, for example, is very consciously about working the absolutely soul-destroying job of inventory and stock management at a big shop. Every 5 minutes or so, you'll get a big load of colourful boxes dumped down here at the bottom of the map, and then you'll have 3 minutes to organise them all as best you can, because then your co-workers are going to appear and ask you to fetch specific quantities of specific items as fast as you can, just in time for the next load of stock to arrive. I normally find Sokoban games pretty stressful, and Wilmot's Warehouse takes it to the next level. The game is teeth-clenchingly demanding at times, with you having to make split-second decisions about how to use your limited carrying capacity, trying to remember where you put all the cakes, and silently cursing your past laziness. Creating a game that's both a great little commentary on real-life stockwork and a management puzzle that's really fun, in a way that rummaging through your bags in, say, an RPG just isn't. Rather than distracting from the action, these little tiny jobs and choices are the central focus, and thus are given the chance to shine that they need. It's always been a bit of a mystery to me as very much a core gamer why people bother with titles like Eve, Animal Crossing, or one of many punishingly intricate and grindy simulator games, when there are loads of titles out there that can give you a more exciting version of the same thing much more quickly. However, as it turns out, sometimes by removing more immediate and cheap sources of enjoyment, you can cut through the experience to find something much more substantial hidden beneath. For decades now, video games have made their name on being vehicles for escapism, a way to kick back, relax, and feel like a demigod for a while. But while these kinds of games are great, if we only ever play affirming, positively minded games and ignore stuff designed to engage with less desirable emotions, we run the risk of suffocating games as an artistic medium just when they're getting started. By taking away the inherent power fantasy in violence and combat, you can create much more intense scenarios and much more tactically engaging decisions because failure is more serious and victory is much harder to plan for. By stripping away your power to mitigate or fix the consequences of your decisions, they become much more important and can create much more interesting stories as a result. And by zeroing in on tiny, intimate details, activities that would ordinarily be a distraction can instead become incredibly compelling. Okay. So with that introduction done, I think it's time we get into the real meat of this video, and that is the crucially important topic of, oh, what? The Elden Ring's finished downloading. Video games are good. And, see ya, bye! Hi, and thanks for watching this video. I'm recording this on a particularly dark day in geopolitics, so I'll dispense with the usual jokey intro. In fact, part of the reason why this video took as long as it did was because I decided to rewrite entire segments of it to avoid references to an at-the-time hypothetical war, which ended up sort of happening. In addition to all the usual stuff I do in this segment, I think it's crucial to preface things by saying that if you take away one thing from this video, it's that you need to give your attention, support, and much more importantly your cash to whatever charities you can in order to help out with the ongoing situation in Ukraine. If you are currently in Ukraine right now, please do what you can to stay safe, and for everyone else, please be extra sure to vet your sources and counter misinformation whenever you see it, and voice your support for the Ukrainian people to your political representatives. Right, that unpleasantness aside, if you want an understandable chill out for a bit, a YouTuber you should really check out is the brilliant Grey Thorn, who's relatively new on the scene, but I've already watched all of her videos and they're all great. I think her best video so far is the one on the idea that virtual reality is not the future of video games, a take I initially expected to disagree with, but Grey actually makes a lot of great points and I've sort of changed my mind. She's also got a TikTok if you use that site, and it's quite good, which is saying something when it comes to TikTok. In addition, if you'd like to support the channel, it means an awful lot, though I must stress that there are some more worthy causes than my Frazzles fund out there right now. If you do support the channel on Patreon, you'll get some behind the scenes stuff, early access to videos, and a semi-regular look back on all the stuff I've released recently, on top of getting your name in the credits. Donating on Patreon is by far the most efficient way to support the channel, especially compared to YouTube ads. Of course, as per always, if you donate $10 a month, you'll even get your name read out at the end, like these wonderful people. who are Andrew Labrano, Alge, Asaran, Bjorn Kala, Brennan Spalling, Brian Notariani, Konstantin Amend, Corey Gerard, Cosmix360, Daniel Metjes, David Setzer, Dirk Jan Karambeld, Dotwo, Diggy Dog, Digleteer, Ekton, Edward Franklin Woods, Eugene Bulkin, Gazkul, Gretar Hannesson, Jacob Dylan Riddle, Janos Fakete, Joey Bruno, Jordan Gear, George Aria Navarro, Lee Berman, Lucas Slack, MaceWindow54, Max Filipov, NWDD, Nate Graff, Patrick Romberg, Pet Pumpkin, Philby the Bilby, Phoenix Thurikaz, Rajagar, Reddidex, Regal Regex, Ray's Dad, Sheldon Hearn, Simon Jacobson, Steve Riley, Strateger in Ultima, The Forbidden Shrimp, Tyler Duncan, Whimsical Wisp, Zach Grendel, and Chow. Cheers for watching, remain vigilant, and I will see you all around. Bye.